Welcome to the screencast for Is Justified True Belief Knowledge by Edmund L. Gettier. And this is a very short excerpt of his already short article. You can find it on pages 74 and 75 in the textbook. So I mentioned that this is very, very short. The entire thing really takes up only one page in the textbook. And the actual published academic article wasn't too much longer. And it happened to be the only thing that Gettier published in his entire decades-long career. Now, if you know anything about academia, which you might not, there's a phrase that's called publish or perish. And when you graduate with your PhD and you go on to become a professor, one of the ways you get prestige or respect in your career is to publish research in journals. And in the 20th century, this got more and more important in a lot of humanities fields over the decades. But Gettier was one who bucked the trend. It doesn't mean you're necessarily bad at what you do. He preferred debating people in person and having lively discussion with students and colleagues. But this made his career. It was considered to be, and still is, a big breakthrough in the idea or the ideas that surround what we think of counts as knowledge. So we remember from the last screencast and the AIR article that philosophers in the 20th century had pretty much accepted the definition of knowledge to consist of justified true belief. Now Gettier came up with a thought experiment that was aimed at showing that this definition still isn't enough to capture the essence of what it means to be knowledge. Remember, I started to explain what thought experiments are. And remember that what's key is understanding the logical point that the author is trying to make, even if the scenario seems a little far-fetched. And you'll see what I mean when I get into some of these examples. So I have this pretty much verbatim from the textbook because it's so short and it's easier to go over it together if it's available for me to copy here and not take up too many slides. Okay, so this is from page 75. He says, suppose that Smith and Jones, two hypothetical people, have applied for some certain job. And suppose that Smith has strong evidence for the following conjunctive proposition. So now we think proposition, remember, that's just a belief or a sentence. And conjunctive just means that both clauses in the sentence or the proposition are true. Conjunctive can be roughly thought of as and, the and function in logic. So he has really strong evidence for this proposition. D, Jones is the man who will get the job, and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. So this is Smith, who thinks this proposition and has good evidence for it. So his good evidence for D might be 1, that the president of the company assured him that Jones would be selected in the end. Maybe he pulled him aside and said, I'm glad you're here practicing your interviews, son, but we're going to give the job to Jones. And that, say, also, Smith had 10 minutes earlier counted the coins in Jones' pocket. Maybe they were both sitting in reception and he took them out to jingle them nervously. So Smith had the opportunity to count how many coins he had in his pocket. So since he did that, and the president of the company told him that Jones would get the job, proposition D entails that the man who will get the job will have 10 coins in his pocket. And all entailment means is that one proposition lends absolute evidence to another proposition. So remember when we were thinking about deductive logic, that if the premises are true, just the structure of the argument makes it such that the conclusion must be true. And this here is a deductive argument. if Jones is indeed the man who will get the job and Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, then we know for certain that the man who will get the job will have 10 coins in his pocket. If D is true, the premise, then E must be true. So Smith sees this entailment, this deductive valid argument, so he accepts E. So now Smith is justified in believing that E is true. He has good enough logical evidence. And now you might imagine further that Smith is the one that actually gets the job. Maybe the president of the company changed his mind or her mind or was messing with him or something happens. That CEO gets a vote of no confidence and the next one wants Smith instead to get the job. So some circumstance happens and it turns out that Smith is the one that gets the job. And also unknown to himself, he also has 10 coins in his pocket. So now we can see here that it was true that the man who will get the job had 10 coins in his pocket. It was something that Smith believed, and he was justified in believing it. So we're focusing on this proposition that's labeled E, this sentence that's labeled E. This is justified, true, and Smith believes it. So on the common definition, that sentence labeled E up there counts as knowledge, even though the evidence ended up being incorrect or skewed somehow. If that example is a little convoluted, and it is, we can look at two other common examples of the Gettier problem. It's also known as the Gettier problem, not just Gettier cases, but these are all two other Gettier cases. So suppose you are at a college where you live on at a dorm, and you have a class every day at 3:30. And you walk from your dorm room through the quad to the classroom building. And in the quad there is a tower clock, like the one in the picture I have here. And this might be an intensive class, so you go every day. And every time that you leave, you look up at the clock and it matches your watch. It's 3 o'clock and you are on time or early for class. But one day when you're sleeping, unbeknownst to you, this clock tower is struck with lightning at exactly 3 a.m. in the morning. So the next day when you get up and get ready to go to class and you look at your watch, you walk through the quad, you look up at the clock, it says 3, it matches your watch, and you're reassured that the clock is accurate. So you head on to class and you're a little bit early or on time. So in this instance, you had the true belief that it was 3 p.m. And you were justified because the clock had been reliable for so long and the clock matched your watch. So you had a justified true belief that the clock was giving you accurate time, but it wasn't. So there was some other element at play. That belief inside your head that the clock was accurate counts as knowledge. And here's a final Gettier case, the landscape painting. So imagine you're driving on a highway and you're in one of the states that are very, very flat in the middle of the country and lots of farms and farmland. And you glance over to your right and you see what looks like a farm to you, like this painting of a farm right there. And you conclude to yourself, oh, I'm driving past a farm. But unknown to you, that was just a very large painting of a farm. And since you were driving and you looked over, relied on your senses, it looked like a farm, so you concluded that there was a farm there. In reality, there was a painting of the farm, but behind the painting is an exact copy of the actual farm. This is where I always want to go back and point out that, yes, thought experiments are not always scenarios that are likely to happen, but they're generally possible, and they're pointing out some logical point inside of an argument. So again, you're justified because your senses are generally reliable. You know what a farm is, and you can see the farm. Say that the conditions are enough that it's good that you're relying on your senses. So it's not dark or twilight. There's enough ambient light that you can trust your eyes to tell you there's a farm there. So you're justified, and it happens to be true, and you believe it. But there's something in the middle there, that painting, that's throwing the whole definition of what counts as knowledge off. You can always look up extra examples of Gettier cases and the Gettier problem. If these are too confusing, you can ask questions underneath this video on YouTube. But for now, I want you to think about what the Gettier cases might mean for our definition of knowledge. Does it prove that justified true belief isn't enough? And if it isn't, what might that extra element be to elevate a belief from mere belief or a false belief or opinion or preference all the way up to knowledge about the world or about ourselves?